Welcome to Talk Cosmos, the show where Sue Rose Minahan and guests unveil astrology's ancient archetypes that continually build the collective experiences in our unconsciousness. Get ready to find your free will from your roots in the stars.
Hi, good evening. This is April 18th. 2020, and we'll be repeating this on Thursday morning. That's Pacific time, 6 a.m. on the 23rd. And tonight's subject continues for the very last week in Aries, and the title is Culminating Aries. Jupiter conjunct Pluto, a dynamic that happens every 13 years. However, this year 3 times. That happens maybe 50, 60. It's hard to gauge. I went through mass years on Solar Fire to try to find that system out, and there's big gaps. It is one of the dynamic energies between the gaseous Jupiter that touches everything and expands it, with Pluto, now considered a dwarf planet, still of magnitude of metamorphosis change. And so this ongoing conjunction, which was actually on April 4th, continues now and will through for the next several weeks, and it will conjunct a second time in retrograde at the very end of June on the 29th. Practically at the same degree, 24 Capricorn, and then, which is a cardinal sign and been very triggered, you might say, all for the last year, and with the solar eclipse, lunar eclipse, that we had back in December and January, and then the conjunction with Pluto. Pluto's making many conjunctions. It's transforming that metamorphosis energy. And as I was going to do with my punchline, November 12th, it's at 22 Capricorn, which again signifies back to that January 12th conjunction with Saturn. So there's a lot of relay, you could say. It's not necessarily a relay perhaps it's like a race where you put the torch into the next hand and it continues on, but it's also like a ping pong echo relay back and forth, again and again, reemphasizing energies. I researched from, which you can on this wonderful software, Solar Fire, which my guest tonight happens to be one of the distributors for, representatives. So if anybody's interested, you might contact her. And it went from 100 years Common Era to 5 years from now, 2025. So there were lots of conjunctions, and I noticed this spread of every similar years that were 3 years, not 3 years, but 3 conjunctions at a time. Systematic, as I said, a little bit irregular because Pluto is a very irregular planet with its elliptical course around the sun, so that Taurus is its longest transiting sign of 30 years, down to Scorpio, which is about 12, and then you go in between. So it's not quite even. But remarkably, there was in 1522 exact similarities to these outer planets. Jupiter and Pluto were in Capricorn. Uranus was in Taurus, later Taurus. I mean, it's the theme. It's not exact of the degree, but the energies are the same. And Neptune the only one with Neptune happened to be in Pisces, just like it is now. And in fact, I was astonished to see, which I hadn't asked for, that Saturn and Mars were both in Aquarius, which we just had a conjunction March 31st with those, which whenever these planets have a conjunction, it's a cycle that we kind of spin off from, you could say, in different phases for several years, depending on that cycle. And of course, when you talk about some of these, Jupiter, Pluto is 13 years, Saturn and Mars was 2. It depends. But again, from 1522, that's 500 years. Just last year, there was all kinds of news. You could Google it, and it says about 500-year cycle. I mean, not cycle, but since in 1522, certain situations were being addressed. And this topic tonight is not specifically about 1522. It is, as I had said, about we're in this month of Aries that initiates and separates to have identity and to defend causes. There's various purposes involved, but also this huge metamorphosis of conceptual thinking that we're experiencing now. So my guest, who is Karen Wennerlind, and her site, seattleastrologer.com. And she shares almost 30 years of a combination of business with astrology, tarot, mythology, metaphysics, mediumship, all focused on the client. Tremendous experience. She has an ongoing online study group. She teaches classes and workshops in both Western and Uranian astrology, another focus. And she's had various board positions, both for various groups of Washington State Astrology Association, we refer to as WASA here in the state of Washington, in every board level there is, on Kepler College, which is an online college that has many ongoing courses that all of you are available to look at. I mean, to not just look at, but to learn from. And other, well, I'll just read it. Camp Edgewood and Church of Divine Grace of National Spiritualist Association of Churches, and she's currently the treasurer of the Council of Vedic Astrology. So her viewpoint and perspective is very broad. And there was a past episode you might just catch on 2019 in August on the 17th about Leo living wholeheartedly. So I am really pleased that I have this wonderful opportunity. Hi, Karen, and how are you tonight?
I'm great, Sue. Thanks for inviting me on.
Yes, it's really a treat. Sometimes the cycle, I'm glad it wasn't a whole year since we've had a chance. Well, we had a bit of a conversation. I know that we will get back to 1522, but in the meantime, we have the current moment. And
absolutely, today on the 18th of April, the sun is at the last degree of Aries at 29 degrees. So pretty much that Aries loves to get it done. And Rick Levine, a local astrologer here, often calls Aries the ready, fire, aim planet. It's like, let's get it done, let's do it, and think about it later.
yes.
And with all of the last month, everybody getting cooped up, and now it's kind of coming to a head. We want to be free, let go, let us go. And it's just serendipity, thinking about how that energy just wants you to be alive, wants you to grow, wants you to start a new season of growth. And so there's a big resistance to standing still. And in a lot of politically, in a lot of states, there've been a lot of protests and stuff in the last week, as that sun has been aspecting the Pluto and Jupiter that Sue talked about in her intro. And it's like, oh, I want to get, it's like, I want to get back to normal, pretend it's all normal again. And in some, and because that energy is sitting there and it's so intense that, a lot of states will, open up over the next month or two. Yeah.
Oh, I was going to, oh, go ahead.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Just
Yeah.
because the energy is there to want to move forward. And so we need to pray and for a protection for all the people in the places that open up a little early, because it may get difficult the next month as the sun moves out of Aries and into Taurus, and Mars will be in the sign of Aquarius, and the two of them will be talking to each other about what do we need to do, um, and we may discover that, we've got to negotiate, we've got to see a big picture, we've got to figure, because there's a lot of moving pieces that
There really
we're,
are.
that we don't know what we don't know.
Well, it's true. That's like,
Ah,
because we did bring up the past, but at this moment, we've never experienced a
yeah,
global pandemic when everything is shut down. And there is this real discipline involved that's arbitrary. So yes, people have been making, not people, but the governors have been making these pacts to, the mental, the
right.
Mars in
Oh yeah, yeah,
improving, yes, in Aquarius, networking, community, all of that energy to try to cooperate together, which is really a very healthy sign of it. And it makes me think or realize that discipline, constriction, which Saturn, of course, does present always in any chart because it's always going to be there. Saturn is one of our
mm-hmm.
compatriots on
Yeah,
this development, but we don't always take kindly to have to readdress what energies we've maybe wasted
yeah,
or don't work. But that's
right.
the name of the game.
Yeah, yeah. And right now, Saturn has moved into the sign of Aquarius, and Aquarius is a fixed sign, and it's Aquarius people are known to be stubborn sometimes.
Mm.
And so while Saturn is donning the clothes of Aquarius, the potential is that the community can become involved in a more structured way. That's the opportunity. It's like all those governors getting together and creating a plan within each other and within their local arenas, and all that kind of cooperation, out of the box thinking. That's the positive of that. The negative of that is when we get stuck in small thinking, then we're in a box. So Saturn does all of it. It says, okay, if you can't think yourself out of the box, you need to reinvent the box, somehow, some way, because you've got a new situation at hand. And
Yes.
yeah,
No, that's excellent. And just to remind audience, in this chart, because of the fact that the sun is at the very end of Aries and has been, this is something that we've been experiencing, and that those planets that are in tension, squaring, as we say in astrology, Jupiter and Pluto, which were conjunct on the 4th of April, but are only a couple of degrees apart. So even on a very conservative measure, they're definitely still conjunct, and they're at odds. And their rulers, and this is where I'll close, is Mars for the sun in Aries and Saturn for Jupiter and Pluto, which happen to be both in Aquarius.
yeah,
And
yeah. And they have just finished a conjunction with each other,
yes,
um, just moments ago
March
in
31st.
astrology time. Yeah. And so the thing with the slow moving outer planets is that those slow moving planets set the tone of a time. They don't action orient anything in, but they set a tone, and it says, here's what you have to work with, folks. And so what can you do with this? And when there's a lot of tension, like with those squares, it's, it can be all, it can be anything. We need to also remember that this is also a super creative time. So all you folks out there who are artistic creatives, writers, this is extraordinary, wonderful period of time for you guys to really feel a lot of energy and be able to focus and get some of those creative ideas out into the world.
Oh, that's fun.
And if the economy weren't kind of collapsing around us, it would also be a great time to really look at your business and what you want to do with that business. Yeah.
Am I echoing? I hope not. I have found, and this is picking up immediately on that thought, because there are constrictions. It's like a whole new game out there for many. But it is most interesting that again and again, those that can move into the online opportunity have really new depths of. I know a woman who has a school here in Seattle, Psychic Awakenings, and she has a marvelous energetic school of how to connect with source, and they've gone remote. They're even doing healings and stuff on remote.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, my sister too, she works for a school with little children and is needing, or in order to get paid, needing to do YouTube little mini programs for like 3 and 4 year olds. That's where the school is for. And so it will be online. I can't give all the information out yet, which I would love to do, but it's so exciting to realize that there is growth, although there's also tremendous loss. It's not all roses, and there's thorns in with those roses.
Yeah, I mean, just as in 2008 in the downturn, and in the 90s we had downturn times that were also for really great opportunities for the entrepreneur to start up, with that caveat that it's going to be what it's going to be, but how do I adjust my business plan to meet this and meet the time? And people will start figuring it out, and while it's very, very difficult right now, especially for business, Capricorn is creating the desire for a new way of manifesting, a new way of making things happen.
That would be, if I may say, would you say too, with and I love this encouragement. This is so beautiful. Mm-hmm. It really is. And also the entrepreneurial energy of Mars, which I think we're going to get into, that won't go away, maybe transiting, but it's staying really highly focused with Aries later on in the year. But with, at the moment, another long planet, such as you're presenting, the environment that we're all dealing with on a personal level, is Uranus in Taurus, of our resources and our values. So when you mention a new way of manifesting, it must be really rooted to what is sustaining. Yes, that's what you're thinking.
Yeah, I mean, because it's and the conversations that are coming up right now about gig workers and self-employed people not being able to get unemployment, and then once somebody gets laid off from a job, they no longer have health care, and what happens if they get sick, and before they can try and get any kind of medical. So it's, it's just bringing up so many questions around what is value, what are our values as a country. It's that when you're unemployed for a long period of time, it gets really tough for your family, you and your family.
Indeed, I have such empathy in many ways.
It's just heartbreaking.
Which means, though, on a new scale, the innovativeness, which is another way of creativity. And of course, Aquarius is outside of the box. It's an irregular planet that spins sideways and backwards. It doesn't function like the others, although Venus also spins backwards. So yes, and networking, it gets back to that 8th house idea where, at least for here on the West Coast, at the moment that we're speaking, because of, just to relate to our audience again, the planets are transiting all the time, and the rising sign, so they're going to be in different moments.
Only 2 hours. Every 2 hours, the rising sign changes.
Yes.
Quick.
It is like it changes. It's a good indication of how energy is shifting all the time. It's not just a stable door key that we open our house with. But Neptune, that's what I was thinking. Neptune right there is in the 8th house. And somehow I was relating that also to the changing, kind of dissolving how we, I think I lost exact train of thought here, but dissolving, how we exchange our resources. It's so important.
Yeah.
It goes along with, networking.
Yeah, it's really interesting with the chart of the United States. Our natal Pluto is at 27 degrees Capricorn, and our transiting Pluto is slowly but surely going to come up and go back and forth over the country's natal Pluto. And the conjunction is sitting there going back and forth over that same Pluto. So here's this, and in the chart that's most often used for the United States, called the Sibley chart, that Pluto is in our 2nd house of money, of cash on hand. And it's like we created a new system of or a new economic system here in the United States. It was not ideal, but and we had all these new states that were all doing it their way, but it was different than the old world.
The capitalism,
here,
you mean,
right?
Yes.
And so this idea of you come to America and you can get rich, come to America and you can succeed. That's a part of that Pluto and Capricorn in the country's 2nd chart. And so now Pluto's coming back, and the question is now, how is that working for Americans in the now? Is that a true thing now, in the here and now? It just asks this big question. It's kind of a Dr. Phil moment. How's that working for you?
Yes, a recheck. It is truly an energy that is a development that has significance in these little, well, not little, but in incremental steps. I mean, this is one of them, but it's a huge backdrop of importance. And in fact, Jupiter is almost at that degree at 6. So we have little other spots, and being philosophical about it right now, thinking of Jupiter close to that degree, is so significant. And I was thinking about what it was based on. We had agriculture at that time. Of course, there were cities and products. And unfortunately, we had people trade, slavery, which thankfully was eliminated. And of course, that was a huge, and I think really it gets back to here. I realize when you get into the politics of life, it's hard. You can't breach over some of the ugly parts, because that's really what it's looking at, is looking at the seed of it going, okay, where did this seed go wrong? How are we going to prune it? How do we get
it doesn't matter if it was right or wrong. It was simply an action that was taken at the time. And what Capricorn says is, if you get lost in the judgment of what is right and what is wrong, you stop your energy. And the idea is to keep moving so that you can create a response, to be thoughtful, to look forward for another creative solution for it.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah.
And it doesn't necessarily, it's not fast. Capricorn is slower than slow. It feels like it takes forever.
Well, it's tradition.
Really, because it builds.
Yes.
You do this, then you do that. Saturn wants you to go in order.
Oh boy, Karen, this is very good. And the fact that, because we're just about to take a break, but this idea of not getting lost in judgment, because Saturn does need to judge and measure, but it's like a stepping stone. It's kind of like looking at your rudder or the winds, checking the base, and then going on forward. Beautiful. We'll be right back. This is Talk Cosmos, Aries Culminating with Karen Wennerlind, and it's the 18th or the 23rd. We'll be right back.
While we take a break from this week's edition of Talk Cosmos, let's take a look at this cycle's archetype. We're currently in the period of Aries. By leaving a cycle based upon completion, the energy of Aries sparks initiation, creating action to separate into a new cycle of life. It's a fire sign, which means it will involve great emotion. And because separation may create resistance, it also takes great courage to break away to new ways of becoming.
Hi, this is John Foster, astrologer and software developer, and you're listening to Talk Cosmos on Alternative Talk 1150 AM, where we understand how to implement our free will through the cosmos.
On the path to good health and well-being? Alternative Talk 1150 is the station for you.
Oh, hi again. We're back again on the 18th of April, and I'm looking at some of the notes here and wanted to just make reference to any new people about what the Sibley chart, that's at 5:10 p.m. July 4th, 1776. And Karen Wennerlind of SeattleAstrologer.com, you can check her out, or else go to Talk Cosmos and you can find out how to contact her if that's and get on her study groups or consultations. And also always subscribe if you'd like. It's easy at Talk Cosmos. And as we continue this conversation with really a focus of the Jupiter-Pluto conjunction, I was just noting the gift from an article that Gray Crawford wrote in Astro.com. And Gray is actually a wonderful astrologer down in Olympia. And I was just pleased to see that he wrote this after I was researching. But he says the gift of Jupiter conjoining Pluto in Capricorn is its capacity to guide us beneath the surface of material circumstances, so we may tap into the roots of form, churn visions of what to manifest from subconscious awareness. So there is great power, and which there always is great power. It's just how do we compost and how do we innovate, like Karen's been bringing up with these energies of Mars, per se, you might say, and Uranus, that because if you go by the dispository tree, which again is astrology talk, you look at what the sign is, who's the ruler, what's that sign, who's that ruling, what house. It goes from Aries to Mars to Uranus. And I I think one factor, and then I'd like to go back to 1522, but let's talk about Mars. I know earlier you had mentioned, yes, because it is going to be a trigger. It's going into Aries for 6 months.
It will. Mars is headed into, right now, it's in the sign of Aquarius. And so it's in Aquarius, it's going in a little bit confrontational, rebelling against the authority of Mars, of the Mars-Saturn conjunction. And what's interesting to see is it's like, okay, there's that argumentative piece. So it's like, how do we, in your own life, you're having the same rebellion with yourself sitting in your living room going, I want to go outside. And how do we negotiate what we need to do, what's important to us, recreating our values with society. Aquarius often talks a lot about the personal relationship to society, to its society. And so for the next month, while Mars is in there, it's like, what is that? I think we're going to hear a lot more about how our individual self is creates for our community around us. And what the politicians are talking about, of course, is the spread of the virus. But what's deeper than that is, how is it that one energy of you gets spread out into your community to offer the gift that you have? And this is a place where that it's deeply personal to you. It's like, what is my calling to serve my community in some way? And it may just kind of show up as, it's like, yeah, this needs to be done. I need to do this. Or it may be quiet. It may be, I see this need, I'm going to do that. But it's about, with Mars, it's about seeing the need, and then on an individual level, determining what can you do to participate in that thing on behalf of your community. And that is incredibly powerful on an internal level when you recognize that one person, one individual does have the capacity to create change.
Significance. Yes, indeed it is. And it really goes back to that polarity point of Aquarius, which is Leo, where we do manifest. I mean, people each have great purpose, and there's so many elements, as we had mentioned earlier, which in the one hand of like that polarity, yes, we manifest our purpose. Then too, if you look at darn, why do I do that? I think of too many things and I try to explain it instead of jumping, and then I get lost. Yeah, it's like the ledge went away. Darn. But
yeah. When with Aquarius and with Saturn and Mars right now in Aquarius, I like to look at them. To me, Saturn and Aquarius are my creator gods. And Saturn creates over the long term. He's the disciplined one step after another. But Mars, he's the worker. He thinks further ahead. He's like this idea guy. It's not necessarily a good idea, but he's an idea generator. And so where Mars, he tries it until it doesn't work anymore. And then he shifts his gears, and then he goes to the next thing. And so Mars needs a focus for his energy, which right now the Aquarius helps give him that that stability for creating a focus.
The mental networking, the ingenious innovation. I'm thinking they correlate very much to the Jupiter Pluto, which we were mentioning, that wants significance and intense personal growth and expansion, because Pluto wants to be fed for its soul growth, and it's going to change our philosophy. And I was just thinking, in the sense of traditional astrology, where signs that are next to each other don't see each other so well, it is an interesting idea that here we have Pluto, which the sun is going to leave, but we have been experiencing where, so maybe we're on the precipice of it, but because, Mercury is still in Aries, and it's going to be transiting through and conjuncting it. But there's moments really of times when that will of who we are, our whole identity, is at odds with what is outdated and grown, from the structure of it and the philosophy. But then, as you're saying, that will of ours, which is connected with Mars, Aries to Mars, in innovative genius and trauma, Aquarius, because things happen so fast, but still it has so much potential, that it's interesting that I think sometimes when we go into, as of, I think it'll be tomorrow, we enter Taurus, that there'll be a better connection with that transformational decay and elimination and rebirth, regeneration that Jupiter's wanting, that actually Mars and Saturn, like you're mentioning, our structure and our action.
Well, one of the nice things about having Jupiter in Capricorn is Jupiter is willing to say, hey, it's not working. He brings light to wherever he is in the zodiac. And so this year's period of time where Jupiter's in Capricorn, he brings light to the reality, to whatever the situation is. And it's, so, and the thing I like about Mars and this Aries energy is that it's not just one thing that's going to fix it, whatever it is in your life. It's not just one thing.
Good point, Karen.
A lot of things. And it's do this, then that, then this, then that, and then set back and go review.
Yes.
Is this getting me where I want to go? And do I want to get there still?
I was just noticing about on the chart, because I'm staring at today's chart, and there aren't any retrogrades. However, as we know, all the personal planets will be in retrograde, and in fact, Jupiter will be too. We'll be going into a season of great return, of refocus, of the path that we've been on right now. So that'll be, anyway, it relates to what you're presenting.
Well, and of course, Venus has already moved into her shadow for her upcoming, and I'm sure you're going to talk about that next month.
Yes.
Or maybe in June too. But, and that, Venus in Gemini period of time, it's like all the ideas, it's all good. It's all good. Now, some of them are more effective than others, and some of those ideals will work for one person, but not for another. So on a personal level, what works for you won't work for somebody else. It's just like, what's going to work in New York City isn't going to work in North Dakota.
Well, that's true.
And so what's going to work in Seattle isn't going to work in Walla Walla.
Except that, well, this is true, but we have such communication that there is this exchange of picking out ideas. I'm going.
Right. It's exactly.
Yeah.
And it's one of those pieces that rich communication, it makes things much quicker, and kind of back to your 1522 chart,
Yeah, I'd like to get there.
with Luther and his, publishing the Bible or the New Testament, it just expanded this awareness. But it was the printing press that was kind of the biggest deal, because
Oh, it
that
was.
spread huge knowledge about all kinds of subjects. And it just so happened that everybody remembers that it was Luther that caused all the problems, but the opportunities of greater education, because we had the ability to communicate.
Well, I think, if I may say, picking up on that really a theme here, when you look at the energies of what correlates to that time and the changes that it changed, is because a lot of this has to do about faith. And at that time, the Reformation with England, King Henry VIII was happening. And of course, Martin Luther it was all part and parcel with the Catholic, in conjunction with the Catholic Empire that was a big energy since, the early 300 AD, or Common Era. And in other words, that what the book by him really resisting, when you think of the same ideas of in Aquarius, both Saturn and Mars, plus you have they're being ruled by Uranus in Taurus of values. But Luther was in a church. He was going to be in sanctuary, and he translated it. But that opportunity made that the common person could suddenly, throughout all of this, however you are on religion, have immediate focus on a direct relationship with spirit, even though it was within the parameters of a defined religion. When I say even as, because personally I think it's our birthright. We are spirits and we connect. But that was a real evolutionary shift towards. So how that relates now, maybe too right now, this idea, just as we're presenting, that one of the bifactors of this whole corona shutdown is to reach inside ourself, somewhat like the school psychic awakenings I was speaking about here in Seattle that's going online, and where there's so many instructions of how to find that inner source within ourselves, because then that relates to everything we do. So that was a real event then, and now on a different scale. Oh, and then you had brought up also about the Aztecs, because Spain, Magellan came back at that time. It was a huge, the earth was round, but Spain was such an energy, and it unfortunately killed the Aztecs. And that's
with Cortez invading Mexico and just completely destroying the Aztec culture.
Yeah.
And
original people.
And bringing with him waves of diseases that the Indian population, the native population, had no tolerance
resistance
for.
No, it was disastrous. That is so true.
Yeah, it was they were decimated over a few years, but it was horrible for that entire
which
culture.
Also leads to, because the plague, as you had said, we had brought up, was in Italy. It had started in 1347, 48 in England, didn't end until 300 years in 1600s, but it would have these devastating.
It came and went.
Exactly. Yeah. It may be 20 years, and then 10 years not, and then another 40 years, and then 10 years not.
Mm-hmm. And then it also would come to a region. So the 1422 happened to be in Italy for about a year, and then it was gone.
Yeah.
And it was not unusual that, it would come and then it would play out. And then a couple of years later, during that period of time. And so that's something we need to, in our lives now. When you think about the vaccines we have developed for the flu, the ordinary virus of flu,
Yes.
because we have those vaccines, then the population doesn't have to go through the huge flu epidemics
No, it's
from the past, because you could take a flu shot.
Yes, it's key. Absolutely, Karen.
And
It's so true.
otherwise we would have a hard time in our cities because of the density.
Or flying
Flu
from
would
coast
take
to
us-
coast.
It's
Yeah.
over. It's like we're just too close together.
Yeah, it will make a big difference.
But we get, it's just like this particular COVID-19 will, in about 18 months, be a part of the annual flu vaccine. And it'll be part of that cocktail that they put together every year, because the different versions of the flu do not go away. They're still there. It's still out there in the environment. It hasn't stopped.
No, but how we can address our immune system and build it on that. And we've advanced, as someone had said once, these other pandemics would affect anybody. And now anybody can be, but not quite the same. It's not like the plague. It's not like those situations for a couple of reasons. One is we do have some knowledge, science that's helping us understand it, but also it does seem to affect certain populations, overweight, or new information is always coming up of what might be depressing the immune system, whether it's other chronic conditions or great age, although there are aged people that make it and there are young people that don't. But it's not just where, oh gosh, the Black Plague, the minute you touched it you were over with. So there's a little bit of a shift that way.
Well, the plague and whatnot are pretty easily controlled. They're spread by fleas and
off rats,
mosquitoes and rats, and that's a cleanliness thing. And where do you put your waste, and how do you store your water,
which is actually very much like
your hands, basic stuff that nobody did back then, because water was, they didn't know, and water was precious. And the minute you move into cities without running water, which who had in those days, just didn't exist. And you might, if you were a normal person, you might not get a bath but every 2 months or so.
Yeah. Well, there are necessary shifts. It's so true. It is.
Yeah.
When you look at Uranus it's really a signature of, we could say it's a signature of so many of the outer planets, but Uranus in Taurus is a real dimension too, besides this conjunction that we're experiencing this year, one of 13 years, where the Jupiter and Pluto make these transmutational. But there, Uranus wants that authenticness, and we have to change those values, and it's forcing us to do it.
Yeah. We're being, I think it's so, it's good and bad. The journey to yourself. It's like,
getting to know you day by day. Yeah, exactly. And I guess too, it's really like, I'm looking on this one paper that I printed out about 500 years on Magellan's voyage changed the world, just to kind of center on that a little bit. But what it's saying too, besides the fact that we're a planet, and isn't it interesting? Yeah. Like here, we're really learning we're a planet. We're all in it together, as some of the headlines say. It's not where it's not just geography and anthropology, like they say, but it's philosophical. It's one world. And so in some ways, this could be, if we keep focused on how we are alike rather than so separate, even though our cultural ways may be different. Well, we have the same needs on this beautiful earth.
Yeah. Yeah. And, this idea that right now that I think is so beautiful of that that for the most part, people around the world are doing the same thing at the same time.
Yes, it's just like a
It's
commonality that is just
like,
extraordinary. It's hard to fathom.
yeah, it's like how did we get that much agreement? And
Yeah.
yes, we have some disagreement, but it's so small in comparison to the agreement.
And the fact here, and I read another little moment. It says, is pioneer at a time when explorers who went off into the unknown had a strong habit of not coming back. But he didn't come back. Magellan was, but his boat came back. And that too is like, I think, another factor that we're in, because of course Neptune with Pisces, it's another backdrop for quite a few years yet until 2026, I think, or that. And it, of the unknown, the greater forces beyond us. And that really connects again, as you've been bringing up, and I, in my own, once again, that is inner, us getting that spiritual moment of, you have to kind of stop the clock to center, to hear the voice. I mean, some of us are maybe more adept. I think you're pretty in tune with that and have a real strength of it. And I find I am, but I can get pretty logical. So I've been really working on this element.
Yeah, our culture is a culture that is constant. We're just constantly in our head. We're just thinking machines. And this Taurus energy and the Capricorn energy says, sit down and feel it.
Yes, that's where the magic happens. That's where we manifest.
Yeah. That's when you know what you really want, because you can feel it. It's deeper. It's more, it's like important with a capital I.
Yeah.
Rather than, ooh, I want red shoes. Red shoes.
Oh, yeah.
Awesome.
Well, it gets...
And yeah, red shoes are fine, but it's not important.
There's other ways to click our heels, like Dorothy, and get what we want. You have to go inside. Next week, I'll take this moment to say, on April 25th, we'll begin Taurus. I mean, as far as a Saturday, Taurus actually begins this week with tomorrow, and then the new moon, I believe, is Wednesday. But it will be with the Moonbeam team. It's a panel including myself and two astrologers, Elizabeth Mouchette here on Camino Island in Washington, and Sarah Stromley of Redmond, Washington. And we focus, as usual, every month on the Taurus new moon and the Scorpio well, in this case, it'll be a Scorpio full moon, but that'll be that day. And tonight, just to remind people, I am speaking with Karen Wennerlind. And Karen was for years and years with East West Books as one of their main astrologers, which has now gone online in that process. And yet Karen does have her site, seattleastrologer.com, and you can always find that at Talk Cosmos. And subscribe. I send out these notices. If you want to keep in touch, that would be great. We have on podcast 1 replays, and we've been talking about culminating Aries. This is April 18th, repeated on the 23rd. I have this little spiel in case you clued in late, and you can hear the episode again. And so Karen and I are talking about many subjects of regeneration again, this wonderful ability. And you said innovation. I love this, with the Aryan Uranus.
Yeah, tremendous innovation. We can't even imagine all the things that are going to come out of this.
No, just like 1522. How did people realize that a book that gave you a new insight on spirituality, or on that side, or a world that suddenly was round, the unknown was somewhat available? Oh my goodness. Well, Karen, it's such a treat. I welcome it.
So nice to be here.
We'll have to do it again.
Yay!
Okay. And blessings to all of you. And always keep in touch. And lots of love. Okay.
Thank you for listening to Talk Cosmos, the show where Sue Rose Minahan and guests unveil astrology's ancient archetypes that continually build the collective experiences in our unconsciousness. Be sure to tune in next Saturday at 6 p.m. to continue finding your roots in the stars.